The room went silent, except for the sharp, cutting laughter of Mrs. Harrington. She stood tall in her tailored suit, her jewelry gleaming under the chandeliers of the grand hotel lobby. The woman's voice was cold, carrying across the marble floor like shards of glass. "You really thought you belonged in here? A maid walking through the front entrance? Look at her shoes. Look at the smell of bleach on her hands." Guests chuckled nervously, some pretending not to see, others too entertained to look away. Elena stood frozen, holding the cleaning cart she had pushed just moments before. She hadn't meant to cross the lobby during the high society event. She had been ordered to bring fresh towels to one of the upper suites, but the shortest way had been through here. And now, under the golden lights and the disapproving gazes of millionaires, she felt stripped bare. "Don't you people hire anyone with dignity anymore?" Mrs. Harrington sneered at the hotel manager, who stood by, embarrassed but unwilling to defend his employee. "She should be invisible, not parading herself in front of us. This is why standards keep falling. You give these people too much importance, and they start to think they are equal to us." The words hit Elena harder than any slap. Equal. The crowd murmured, and someone whispered, "She should know her place." The humiliation sank into her bones, but she did not cry. Not in front of them. She held her head just enough not to look broken, but her silence was misunderstood as obedience. Mrs. Harrington turned her back with a final dismissive laugh. "Clean the stains, maid. That's the only role you are born for." Elena's throat burned, her hands trembling on the handle of the cart. Her chest was heavy, but inside, beneath the shame, something darker was stirring, a quiet flame of defiance. That night, long after the guests had left, and the marble floor smelled only of wax and lemon polish, Elena worked silently. She replayed every word in her mind. Invisible. Born to clean stains. Equal. The humiliation lingered, but so did her dignity. She had survived worse than rich people's laughter. What they did not know was that she carried secrets. She always listened. She always observed. And one day she knew she would no longer be the one forced to bow. The next morning, the whispers began. The Harrington family was hosting a private meeting in the presidential suite. Politicians, businessmen, and investors. The hotel staff had been ordered to avoid the entire floor, unless summoned. Yet Elena, assigned to the night crew, found herself with access to the service corridors that connected directly to that suite. She didn't intend to spy, not at first. But humiliation has a way of sharpening curiosity. When she passed the hidden service door, voices leaked through the cracks. Mr. Harrington's voice was heavy, calculating. "No one can know about this transfer. If the press discovers how we've been moving funds offshore, it will destroy us." Another man chuckled nervously. "Relax. As long as the signatures are falsified properly, no one will trace it back." Papers shuffled. Glasses clinked. Elena froze, her heart thudding. Offshore accounts. Forged documents. They were talking freely, convinced no one of consequence could hear them. That was the arrogance of power. They never imagined the maid might be listening. She lingered only long enough to catch fragments words about bribes, about stolen land, about a deal that would leave hundreds of poor families without homes. She backed away, nearly stumbling over her cart. That night, when she sat in her small, dim apartment, she thought about the scene. The humiliation in the lobby, the secrets she now held, and the invisible weight pressing down on her life. She had lived years like this, looked down upon, underpaid, unacknowledged. But now, she possessed knowledge that could shatter reputations. She wasn't naive. She knew exposing them could crush her too. They had lawyers, politicians, newspapers in their pockets. She had nothing but her memory and her resolve. Days passed, and so did more whispers overheard in corridors, notes accidentally left behind in trash bins she emptied. careless phone calls made while she scrubbed bathrooms. The Harringtons were building an empire of lies, and Elena was slowly collecting the fragments of their corruption. But humiliation did not stop following her. One afternoon, she was called to clean the boardroom. The meeting had ended, but Mrs. Harrington lingered with two friends. "Can you imagine?" she laughed, sipping her wine. "This maid once dared to look me in the eyes, as if she were human. I almost pity them, you know. They live small lives, scrubbing after us, dreaming of things they'll never touch. It's pathetic." Elena bent to wipe the polished table, her face inches from their laughter, her hands steady, though her chest thundered. She wanted to shout, to throw the cloth in their faces, but instead she kept wiping. That was her armor, silence and memory. She knew that if she exploded now, she would lose everything. Better to let them believe she was broken, while inside she sharpened her resolve like a hidden blade. Late one night, she visited an old friend, Matteo, once a journalist, now working as a night shift security guard after being blacklisted for writing the truth. He looked at her with surprise when she told him what she had heard. "Elena, this is dangerous. People who cross them disappear." "I've disappeared all my life," she said quietly. "I've been treated as nothing. Maybe it's time they see me." Matteo hesitated, but eventually he nodded. "If you're serious, we need proof. Words won't be enough. These people bury scandals every day." Proof. That was the word Elena carried with her like a prayer. Weeks turned into months as she carefully gathered pieces. Discarded drafts of contracts with altered names. Photographs of meetings taken with the cheap phone she hid in her cleaning cart. A USB drive one of the businessmen had carelessly dropped in a trash bin. She never acted reckless. She never rushed. Humiliation had taught her patience. Meanwhile, the Harringtons continued to treat her as invisible, or worse, a prop for their cruelty. Once, during a gala, Mrs. Harrington deliberately spilled wine on the carpet and called her in front of everyone. "On your knees, maid. Show these people what you're worth." Elena knelt, her face burning as laughter echoed around her. She scrubbed while cameras flashed, and yet she did not break. Inside, she whispered to herself, "Soon." And soon came faster than they expected. One evening, Elena overheard the Harrington patriarch speaking to a politician. "The documents must be signed tomorrow. Once the land is seized, construction begins. No one will stop us now." But Elena already had the documents. She had scanned them. She had dates, amounts, names. Matteo had contacts willing to publish if the story was real. She was ready. The night before the deal, she stood alone in the lobby where she had first been humiliated. The chandeliers glittered above her, but this time she did not feel small. She felt steady. For once, she was the one holding power, though no one knew it yet. The following morning, newspapers screamed headlines of corruption and fraud. The Harrington name, once untouchable, was dragged through mud. Politicians denied ties. Investors pulled out. Cameras swarmed. And in the hotel lobby, as Mrs. Harrington stormed through, pale and frantic, she saw Elena standing by her cart, head high. "You," Mrs. Harrington hissed. "You did this." Elena met her eyes. For the first time, she spoke not as a servant, but as an equal. "No, you did this. I just stopped cleaning your mess in silence." The room fell into shocked silence. And this time, no one laughed. The days after the scandal were chaos. Television screens in the staff cafeteria flickered with breaking news. The Harrington empire collapsing under the weight of investigations. Employees whispered in corners, afraid but secretly relieved. For years, everyone had known the family's wealth was tainted, but no one dared to speak. Now the silence was broken, and though Elena never admitted her role, rumors began to circulate. "She's always near them," one housekeeper whispered. She knows things? Elena? She's just quiet. Too quiet. Quiet, yes, but no longer invisible. People looked at her differently now. Some with fear, others with respect. She felt the shift in the air when she entered a room. And Mrs. Harrington, once so proud, could not bear it. One evening, Elena was called into the manager's office. The manager, nervous and sweating, closed the blinds. "Elena," he said cautiously, "the Harringtons are displeased. They've demanded your dismissal." Elena's stomach tightened, but she kept her voice calm. "Have I done my work poorly?" "No, of course not. You're the best we have. But they believe you've, how do I say, this overstepped your role." "My role," she repeated softly, "to stay silent, to bow my head, to erase myself." The manager looked pained, but said nothing. He handed her the envelope. "You'll be compensated." That night, Elena walked home with her uniform folded in her arms, her last paycheck tucked in her bag. For a moment, despair threatened to crush her. They had taken her livelihood, the little security she had. But as she climbed the creaking stairs to her apartment, she realized something. For the first time, she wasn't dismissed as a nobody. She was dismissed because she frightened them. That was power. Matteo found her that evening sitting by the window, staring at the city lights. "They fired you." "Yes." "Good. Now you're free." She turned to him, confused. "Free? Elena, don't you see? You're no longer tied to their floors, their carpets, their tables. You're free to choose how to use what you know." His words stayed with her. Days turned into restless nights, and in those hours she began to write. Page after page, she recorded every humiliation, every overheard secret, every cruel word that had burned into her memory. She didn't write as a victim. She wrote as a witness. Her notebook became her weapon. One morning, Matteo slid a business card across the table. "There's a publisher who might be willing to read this." They're not afraid of rich enemies. Fear pulsed through her veins. Publishing meant exposure. It meant war. But the humiliation she had endured replayed in her head. The laughter, the sneers, the commands to kneel. And with trembling hands, she agreed. The manuscript took months to prepare. Elena worked part-time jobs to survive, cleaning smaller houses, scrubbing kitchens, polishing floors, but at night, she wrote. She described the hotel lobby scene with raw detail, the sound of laughter echoing in her ears, the way her dignity had been treated like dirt. She described the backroom deals, the evidence she had found, the hypocrisy of the elite who sipped champagne while stealing homes from the poor. Her words were sharp, emotional, undeniable. When the book finally hit the shelves under the title The Invisible Hands, it spread quietly at first, then ferociously. People recognized themselves in her story maids, gardeners, nannies, delivery workers. They had all felt invisible. They had all been humiliated. Elena's voice was their voice. Talk shows invited her. Journalists hunted her down. And though she never revealed every secret she held, the pieces she shared were enough to ignite a movement. "Dignity is not a luxury," she told one interviewer, her voice steady. "We clean your homes, your hotels, your streets. Without us, your world rots. We are not invisible. We never were." But success drew enemies. The Harringtons filed lawsuits, accusing her of slander, of fabrication. They dragged her name through the mud, trying to paint her as bitter, delusional, uneducated. A maid writing books? Mrs. Harrington scoffed on national television. "It's laughable. She should stick to what she knows, scrubbing floors." Yet each insult only gave Elena more power. Videos of Mrs. Harrington's contempt went viral, sparking outrage. People who had once looked away when servants were mistreated now saw the cruelty for what it was. Still, the pressure was suffocating. There were threats, anonymous letters slipped under her door, menacing voices on the phone. Matteo insisted she move to a safer place, But Elena refused. "I've hidden all my life. I won't hide now." The breaking point came at a televised hearing. The government had opened an inquiry into the Harrington Empire, and Elena was called to testify. She stood before rows of politicians, cameras flashing, the Harringtons seated across from her with their lawyers. Mrs. Harrington's eyes burned with hatred. This is absurd. A maid's word against ours? Elena took a deep breath. Her voice, calm but firm, filled the room. "You once told me my only role was to clean stains. You were right, except the stains I clean now are the ones you leave on this country." Gasps echoed through the chamber. The Harrington lawyer objected, but the damage was done. For hours, Elena recounted what she had seen and heard. She described the forged documents, the bribes, the meetings behind closed doors. She spoke not with anger, but with precision, her dignity unshakable. And when she finished, the room fell into a silence heavier than stone. Outside, crowds had gathered. Workers, activists, ordinary citizens, people who had never cared about politics, now chanted her name. Elena, Elena, Elena. That night, she walked through the same grand hotel lobby where everything had begun. She no longer wore a uniform. She no longer pushed a cart. She wore a simple dress, her head high. And though some guests whispered, most stepped aside, as if instinctively recognizing the power she carried. At the far end of the lobby, she saw Mrs. Harrington, pale and desperate, arguing with reporters. Their eyes met once again. "Are you proud of yourself?" Mrs. Harrington spat, her voice trembling with rage. "You've destroyed us." Elena's reply was calm, almost tender. "No, you destroyed yourselves. I only stopped being silent." For the first time, Mrs. Harrington had no words. And for the first time, Elena felt truly seen. But her journey was not over. The court cases dragged on, the threats continued, and the weight of exposure was heavy. Yet she no longer carried it alone. Across the country, other workers began to speak, inspired by her courage. Stories surfaced: abuse, exploitation, humiliation. Elena's name became a symbol, not of revenge, but of justice. Still, in the quiet of her nights, she often returned to one memory: the sound of laughter in the lobby, the moment she had been stripped of dignity before a crowd. That wound would never fully heal, but it had given her something else: the fire to fight, the strength to endure, the courage to speak. And so she embraced it. The humiliation that once crushed her had become her weapon. Winter came with biting winds and restless nights. Elena, though praised publicly, often felt the weight of being both hero and target. The book had made her name known. The hearings had carved her face into newspapers, but recognition came with isolation. Old friends treated her differently, unsure how to speak to someone who had challenged the untouchables. Even her neighbors avoided her at times, fearful of the enemies she had made. But there were also moments of warmth. One evening, as she walked through the market, a woman selling vegetables stopped her. "Are you Elena?" the woman asked, eyes wide. When Elena nodded, the woman pressed 2 apples into her hands. "For my daughter. She works as a cleaner. She listens to your story every night. You gave her courage." Elena carried those apples home as if they were gold. Recognition wasn't just about headlines or cameras. It was about dignity restored, one voice at a time. Yet humiliation wasn't finished with her. The Harringtons, though weakened, still had influence. They used it with venom. At one court session, their lawyers sneered. "Mies, Elena, do you even have an education? Can you prove you understood what you claim to have overheard? Perhaps you misinterpreted words beyond your comprehension." The room chuckled. It was meant to belittle her, to remind everyone she was just a maid. Elena felt the old sting of humiliation flare inside her. But instead of shrinking, she straightened. "Perhaps I don't have your education," she said firmly, "but I know the sound of lies when I hear them. I know the weight of stolen bread. And I know the difference between dignity and arrogance. That's an education life gave me one you clearly lack." The chuckles turned to murmurs, then to silence. Even the judge leaned forward, as though struck. Still, the battles drained her. Weeks blurred into months of testimonies, threats, long nights staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. Matteo remained at her side, often reminding her to eat, to sleep, to breathe. Yet she felt lonelier than ever. One night, she sat with him on the rooftop of his building, looking at the city's glittering skyline. "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" she asked softly. "All the pain, all the anger. Will it really change anything?" Matteo studied her, his face lit by the orange glow of street lamps. "Do you think the woman who gave you those apples would ask that question? Or the workers who chant your name? Elena, maybe you can't change everything, but you've changed something. For them and for yourself. Isn't that worth it?" She closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. Maybe justice wasn't a clean victory. Maybe it was small steps, quiet transformations. Her turning point came when she was invited to speak at a gathering of workers' unions. She stood on a makeshift stage in a crowded hall, hundreds of faces watching her. At first, she faltered. Public speaking was new to her. But then she remembered the laughter in the lobby, the sting of humiliation that had once silenced her. And she found her voice. "You asked me to speak," she began, her tone steady. "But I am one of you. I scrubbed the floors of hotels that pretended not to see me. I knelt on carpets while people laughed above me. They told me I was nothing, but I am here. I am still here, and so are you." The hall erupted in applause. "Do you know what I learned?" she continued, her voice rising. "Power only lasts as long as silence. They believed we would never speak, never fight, never claim our dignity. But look around, every one of us carries a story. Every one of us carries truth. And truth is heavier than their money, louder than their laughter. Truth is the one thing they cannot erase." The crowd thundered, people rising to their feet, clapping, chanting her name. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she stood tall, her dignity a shield, her words a weapon. The speech spread like fire across social media. Videos of her defiant words reached millions. For every insult hurled at her by the Harringtons, 10 voices rose to defend her. She had become not just a witness, but a symbol of resistance. But the more powerful her voice became, the more desperate her enemies grew. One evening, as she walked home, a black car slowed beside her. The window rolled down, and a man in a suit leaned out. "You should stop," he said coldly. "For your own safety, for your family's safety." Elena's steps faltered, fear crawling up her spine. She had no family nearby. Her parents were gone, her siblings distant. But the message was clear. They would target anyone connected to her. She forced herself to keep walking, her head high, though her hands trembled. At home, she sat in the dark, listening to the city outside. She could stop. She could vanish back into anonymity, protect herself from further harm. But then she remembered the vegetables, the apples, the faces in the crowd. She remembered the girl who scrubbed wine stains off a carpet while laughter tore her apart. No, she would not stop. The final trial arrived in spring. Elena was called once more to testify, this time with undeniable evidence. She and Matteo had secured a series of financial documents, cross-checked with witness accounts. The Harrington lawyers squirmed, their arrogance cracking under the weight of proof. Mrs. Harrington, desperate, rose to her feet mid-session. "This is a farce. A maid cannot decide the fate of my family." Elena looked at her, unflinching. "A maid can decide her own fate, and that is enough to decide yours. The chamber erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled. The judge banged the gavel, demanding silence, but it was too late. The words had already been carved into history. When the verdict came weeks later, it was devastating for the Harringtons. Fines, confiscated assets, prison sentences for their closest associates. They were not ruined completely. The rich rarely are, but their invincibility had shattered. Elena watched the news quietly from her apartment. She did not cheer. She did not gloat. Justice was not triumph. It was a heavy silence, a wound acknowledged. And yet, when she walked down the street the next day, a stranger stopped her, an old man with tired eyes. He tipped his hat and said, "Thank you." That was enough. Elena realized her story had ceased to be just hers. It had become a mirror for countless others, a spark that lit fires in quiet corners. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer only a maid. But she never forgot where it began: the humiliation, the laughter, the sting of being treated as less than human. She carried it with her not as shame, but as a scar turned into strength. Because in the end, justice was not revenge. It was recognition. It was dignity restored. It was standing tall in the very places where she had once been forced to kneel. Months passed, and the world moved on to new scandals, new headlines. But Elena's story refused to fade. Universities invited her to speak. Community centers asked her to share her journey. Workers carried her book in their bags, as if it were a shield. She became a voice, unwillingly at first, but gradually with purpose. Yet she remained the same in many ways. She still lived in a modest apartment. She still cooked simple meals. She still walked through the city streets unnoticed by most. But she carried something priceless now: respect. When people looked at her, they no longer saw only a uniform or a cleaning cart. They saw someone who had stood up in the face of humiliation and refused to bow. One afternoon, she returned to the hotel where it had all begun. The building was under new management. The Harrington name had been scraped from its walls. But the marble floor was the same, and the chandeliers still glittered above. She stood in the lobby, the memory of laughter echoing faintly in her mind. A young maid passed by, pushing a cart, eyes cast down. Elena stopped her gently. "Don't bow your head," she whispered. The girl looked startled, then slowly lifted her gaze. Elena smiled. "You have as much right to stand tall as anyone else in this room." It was a small moment, unnoticed by the guests. But Elena felt the weight of it deeply. She had once been that girl, silenced by fear, crushed by humiliation. Now she was the voice telling others not to accept it. Still, the shadows of the past sometimes clawed at her. At night, she would wake from dreams of kneeling on the carpet, while laughter thundered above her. In those moments, she reminded herself that she had risen, that she had transformed pain into strength. But scars, even healed, leave marks. Matteo often reminded her not to carry the weight alone. "You've done enough," he would say. "You don't have to fight every battle." But Elena knew she couldn't stop. Not because she loved the fight, but because she had felt the crushing silence of being unseen, and she could never let others remain there. Her final confrontation with Mrs. Harrington came unexpectedly, nearly a year after the verdict. Elena was speaking at a charity event when she saw her in the crowd. Mrs. Harrington was thinner now, her expensive clothes unable to hide the desperation in her eyes. When the event ended, she approached Elena, her voice brittle. "You destroyed everything," Mrs. Harrington whispered, her words trembling with venom and exhaustion. "Do you feel proud?" Elena looked at her for a long moment. She saw not the powerful woman who had once humiliated her, but a hollowed shell clinging to arrogance. "No," Elena said softly, "I don't feel proud. I feel human. Something you never let me be." Mrs. Harrington flinched as if struck. For the first time, she lowered her gaze, unable to hold Elena's eyes. That was the justice Elena had longed for, not revenge, not wealth, not even victory in court. It was this moment, the powerful forced to see her as equal, the arrogant stripped of their false superiority. Afterward, Elena walked outside into the cool night air. The city buzzed, indifferent to her story, yet she felt at peace. For years, she had been invisible, her existence dismissed as background noise. But now, she knew she could never be erased again. The world might forget the headlines, but those who had heard her story carried it in their hearts. Workers who lifted their heads higher, strangers who whispered, "Thank you." A young maid who dared to meet someone's eyes, all of it was justice. As she walked home, Elena thought of her younger self, the girl scrubbing stains in silence, swallowing humiliation, dreaming of dignity she thought she'd never have. She wished she could reach back through time and tell that girl, "Hold on. One day, your silence will break. One day, the laughter will end. One day, you will be seen." And so, her story ended not with applause or riches, but with recognition. She had been humiliated, underestimated, silenced. But she had transformed pain into power, humiliation into memory, silence into voice. The maid who had once been told to know her place had remade her place with her own hands. And though the world would continue to bruise and wound, Elena would always stand as proof. Dignity cannot be erased. Not by wealth, not by cruelty, not by arrogance. In the end, justice had not been about bringing others to their knees. It had been about rising from her own.